Okay, would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out today. We've got crowd inside. We also have a crowd watching at home. So that's kind of the new world we're in, right? So I'm Aaron Nygren, extension educator here in Saunders County. So thank you for joining us for the crop inputs and cost of production workshop. I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter today, Jessica Groskopf. Let her kind of talk about why we're having this meeting a little bit, right? What the situation we're in. So I'll turn it over to Jessica.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Jessica Groskopf. I'm a regional extension economist, and I'm actually from Scottsbluff, Nebraska. So I'm a little bit a ways from home today, but I had some travel over here on this side of the state. So I'm really glad to be with you guys. So why are we kicking off with an economist? And I think it's a fun opportunity to talk about what's happening in the market, especially when it comes to inputs. Now, I am not a fortune teller, although there may be some resemblances to me here. That's not what we as economists do, right? So I love when folks say, I know exactly what's happening in the market, or your crop consultant calls and says, you need to purchase inputs now because it's just going to go higher. And nobody knows ultimately what's going to happen in this market. And I think that's a really good reminder. You know, if I knew what was going on, I wouldn't be an economist for the University of Nebraska. I'd be living on my own island somewhere. Okay. So just as a reminder, we're going to talk about where we are. I'm not going to do any predicting of the future. And we're going to talk about basically dealing with the cards that were being dealt by the market at this point. So just as a side note, in my regular life, like I like to call it, I'm married to a farmer. So we farm north of Scottsbluff. We grow corn and dry edible beans. I hope by the time that I get home, we will be done harvesting. But I can guarantee that all summer long, I've been watching this particular chart. This is from the World Bank, and it shows DAP, MOP, and urea prices and how they've progressed throughout 2021, looking forward to 2022. We've had a lot of cussing and discussing at our kitchen table about, boy, what's happening with input prices. So then I open all my farm magazines, and this is all I see. Every single one of them. It's going up, it's going up, it's going up. Nobody's telling me what we should be doing about it's going up, right? Or there's little discussion of what should we do right now. So today I want to focus on what we can be doing right now. And most of the time when I come and I teach grain marketing. And when we teach grain marketing, we talk about building an average price, right? We're going to make some sales and some decisions throughout the year to build some revenue for our operation and make those sales consistently and hopefully build that average price. Okay, so it's not about the one buy or the one sell. It's about the combination of the decisions that I've made as a marketer. And I think we can take that and work that way on the input prices. I know a lot of times I think about inputs and I think about buying them at one shot, right? And it's a precarious time of year, right? We're getting done with harvest. Everything's kind of settling down. Maybe we made some money this year. Maybe we did a good job of marketing and we're ready to look at our tax liability for the year. And this would be the traditional time that we would potentially lock in some of those input prices. So let's get into it. Why are we where we are at? I think one of the most interesting things is thinking about what's happening globally with fertilizer prices and the fact that the US is the largest importer of fertilizers in the world. Depending on the year, about 25 to 40% of nitrogen comes from overseas, about 15 to 40% of phosphorus, and nearly all of our potassium does. Okay. So I'm actually a trade geek. I really like international trade. I find it very, very interesting. And I like to know where our products are coming from. So if we look at that nitrogen side, we see our friends from Russia, Canada, Qatar, Trinidad, and Tobago. If I go into P, we're looking a little bit more kind of Middle Eastern, Israel, Morocco, Egypt, Lebanon. And then when I look at K, Canada, and then Russia, Belarus, and Israel. Okay.
So are those exporting countries or they're also importing?
So they're the main producers who are exporting to the US. You'll notice who's not on our list. China. Let's talk about it. So part of what's driving prices right now is that both our friends Russia and China are limiting their exports of fertilizer around the globe. And even though we're not trading with China in terms of fertilizer, it is impacting the global market. If I could make a theme for the year 2021, I think it would be the breakdown of the supply chain. And we're seeing that happen. And on the fertilizer side, to some extent, it's being exacerbated by the limiting exports from China and Russia. Part of why Russia is limiting their exports is due to natural gas prices. We also have some challenges in our ports. Hurricane Ida did do some damage at New Orleans, which is our main port of entry for fertilizers. And then as we think about internal movement within the US, we've got rising freight costs, okay, that are causing some challenges. So this is the reality of where we live, okay? One thing that bothers me as I look at the farm magazines and as we start to discuss this is we're all discussing costs, but we're not talking about the other side of the equation. So yes, inputs are rising, but so are commodity prices. And we can't cuss one and not talk about the other, right? And so it's really important that we keep in mind that our income, or excuse me, that our profit is derived from subtracting our costs from our income. And so as we move through this today, we're going to talk about fertilizer. We're going to get into that, but I don't want you to forget the income side of this equation and making some smart marketing decisions as we move ahead. Because I think there are market opportunities. So being a good economist, I think to try to illustrate kind of that relationship between where the commodity prices are at and where the fertilizer prices are at, I want to get them on an equal playing level in terms of dollars per acre. Okay, so to do that, what we did was we pulled current fertilizer prices from the New Orleans port for urea. Now, my problem is that I don't have freight rates. I don't have historical freight rates coming out of New Orleans. Okay, I'll show you here in a minute what that does. We need to know the number of units of nitrogen per acre. I was talking to Aaron beforehand. We're going to use a number of 150 here. And then what we're going to do is look at the new crop commodity prices. This is one of the big issues I see when folks start trying to do this comparison is they're comparing nearby prices, 2021 prices, when you're actually looking at buying inputs for 22 and therefore need to be looking at 2022 prices. Okay. So what we're ultimately going to come up with is the number of bushels to cover the cost of per acre nitrogen. So just to walk you through the calculation, just so that you see the math and we can look at it. So I'm going to show you 2022, but I threw in 21 just as a comparison so you can see how the relationship changes. And you'll notice they're not wrong, right? The price is double, okay? So if I calculate this out, it comes $1 per pound of nitrogen of 60 cents. If I'm gonna apply 150 units of nitrogen, that gives me a cost of nitrogen per acre, just input, not labor, not machinery, not any of that, of $89.99. We pulled up, that was Frontier Co-op's bid for new crop, December 2022 corn at 507. And so basically I would have to produce 18 bushels of corn to pay for that nitrogen expense. Okay. So it's always fun to look back in history because sometimes our minds forget, right? It's easy to think, well, I didn't pay that much last year. What's going on? But what I want to show you is the relationship and that we have experienced these relationships before. And because you're sitting here, I think most of us survived those relationships before, right? We have to be a better manager, costs and revenue. Now, a couple of things. Number one, I don't have transportation to your farm in here. Okay, and I didn't want to make that assumption. I wanted it to be as clean as possible. Okay, so the reality is larger than this. And we'll get into that. But the other thing is thinking about bushels of expected production has improved as I move over the past 20 years. So what I expected to produce in 04 when we saw a similar relationship to what I expect to produce in 22 is much different. So unfortunately, PowerPoint doesn't ever let me do anything very interactive, but Excel does. So like any good economist, we're going to do a little math. Oh, yeah. New share. Okay, so we're going to do a little math. So what is the $1 per pound of nitrogen you've been quoted on your place?
Per pound,
Yep, per pound.
we're thinking price per ton, like urea, or 32, or
Whatever you've been given a quote for. And if anybody in the chat wants to throw in what they've been quoted, that would be great too. We'll watch the chat as well.
We locked some 32 at 65 cents.
65. And 150 units of nitrogen per acre sound okay? Okay, so we can see how that relationship adjusts. Okay, so this is really something simple that you can do at home, that you can just throw into even your regular calculator. Doesn't take too much as long as you get your per unit of nitrogen correct. And you can look at how many bushels I need to produce to cover that amount. I've heard higher. I've heard somewhere in the 90 to $1 range. So we're talking, depending on what you're able to lock in, 25 to 30 bushels in that range. But again, I might be purchasing more than one product. I might be purchasing different products on different fields. So this might be something that you need to do multiple times or come up with an average $1 per unit of nitrogen. One of the things that I'm seeing is that some people think that the answer of are you buying fertilizer is a yes or a no answer. Are you going to buy this fertilizer? Yes or no.
Yeah.
And it's not but it's not a dichotomous decision. Yes, no, maybe. There's a whole spectrum of possibility when we look at what's going to happen to that nitrogen price. And so I've seen a little bit, and I love my agronomists, don't get me wrong, but I've seen a little bit of scare tactic, and you need to lock this in now because tomorrow it's going to be higher. You don't have to, right? You have the opportunity again. You can purchase a smaller unit maybe at this higher price, you want to guarantee a certain amount or a certain product. And then wait a little while and see what happens to the market. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure. Your suppliers have a lot of pressure to get what they can, and they're going to need to sell that hopefully at a decent margin. So it's important that we think about yes or no is not the only opportunity. Okay. I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting where I'm at. There's supposedly going to be a shortage of glyphosate. And where we're at, glyphosate is the only product for sugar beets. So that's probably a yes for my sugar beet acres. Whatever the price is, I'm going to lock that product in. But as I look at other commodities, I have more options and I can make a different decision. Okay. So don't get stuck in this binary yes or no situation. There's still a lot of time between now and when we plant and what we can do on our input side. So I want to talk about navigating uncertain financial times, because I think this also folds into the larger financial picture of our operations. And what's good for me and what I can afford is very different from what you can afford, or what the person next to you can afford, or what your neighbor down the way can afford. So first is to evaluate commodity marketing plans. If I purchase inputs at this higher price, I might need to go ahead and think about locking in some 2022 grain. Okay. So higher prices make us better marketers. Higher input costs make us better marketers. Okay. Focus on optimizing and not maximizing. This is especially true when it comes to yield, right? I think sometimes we put out inputs almost as an insurance product, a secondary insurance product on that crop to maximize that yield. This is a year we're going to need to optimize based on the input costs. The next one is cash is king. This is by far the lesson of the 80s, right? As we move into this place, we need to watch our cash. Okay, so working capital and current ratio are two places that you really need to watch. What that deals with is the top of your balance sheet, current assets and current liabilities. How much money do you have on hand and plan to make this year versus how much do you plan to spend based on the debt that you have and the inputs that you're going to purchase? Okay, so looking at that relationship, if that relationship is tight and cash is tight for you, be working with your lender now and talking through some of these purchase decisions. And the last one is shop around for inputs and services. I think sometimes as farmers, we're very, very loyal to our suppliers, but maybe this is the year to call around a little bit, especially if somebody's giving you the hard sell, right? And also, I like to call it the discount double check. I'm sure that's probably trademarked, but also have your fertilizer recommendations reviewed by one of these brilliant agronomists in the back of the room. We'll be going through, 3 universities and 1 laboratories recommendations for different fertilizer inputs today. Totally not my world. But they're very intelligent about it and will help you make sure you're putting on the right product in the right place for the right yield goal. The next one is cash flow. Okay. Please, as the economist up front begging you, develop a monthly cash flow budget now. If you know you've got these higher input costs, this will help us manage that money flow throughout the year. You might find that when you put it in a monthly format that you are going to need a larger operating note or line of credit. Okay. It's much easier to have that conversation with your banker with that projection in hand than saying, I'd like a couple extra thousand, right? Or tens of thousands. Okay. I think your bankers are going to be understanding, but it's a lot easier to extend that line of credit to somebody who's done the work. So do the work. Reference this document when you're making purchase decisions. You can put together this monthly cash flow based on the prices that you're hearing right now. And then as you start to lock in your input costs, you can go ahead and adjust that budget and then compare your actual expenses throughout the year. But I like to see it on a monthly basis so that we know about that operating loan. So just a couple of reminders, the best place to find information about crop production in Nebraska is cropwatch.unl.edu. The place that I work is the Center for Ag Profitability. A lot of my articles and Glennis's articles will show up in both locations. CAP also has the Ag Budget Calculator, which we will see later, as well as a wealth of resources, including recorded workshops and news articles. We also host a weekly webinar series on Thursdays. I forgot to change that at noon Central Time, 11 a.m. Mountain. And we always try to hit the hot topics of the day. So that was a lot of talking and a little bit of time. Any questions related to kind of the where are we start to our workshop today?
We had one chat, pull up your spreadsheet again.
Okay.
So they were, current bid of $1,400 on anhydrous, which would be 85 cents a pound. And say they were irrigated corn, high yield gold, they were 250 pounds. And yes, the numbers do get a lot different, right? I mean, that's
Right.
the importance of everyone running their own.
Yeah.
numbers, right? So,
Yeah, and that's why we wanted to show the simple calculation so that you could run it for yourself, just to kind of get that process. The other thing though is to look at what that December corn price is and what you can lock in today. And then I would go back and reevaluate it later in the year, especially, if we get into early January, and we'll see where the market starts to kind of settle into as we come out of harvest. And I think that'll be, again, kind of running your numbers as much as you can to know what you've got on hand. There's another chat that came across. Yeah. Okay. All right, well, I'll turn it over to Aaron. And we're gonna be here. So if you have any questions, please interrupt us. I don't know where I'm going, so I'm just gonna keep doing that.
Okay, so those of you that are in the crowd, you should have a packet in there, which would look like this cover or this. Let me go to actual showing the screen. So one thing I just wanted to make you aware, forgot before, if you're in here and you wanted to get on Wi-Fi, this would have the Wi-Fi information if you want to log into that. So in that packet, as you flip through, so the second page, there's an example of a soil test, right? I think that's really the key with all of this is it's really an important year to look at what the actual numbers are, right? Instead of just always putting on the rate that you always put on, look at what you have in the soil, look at what you really should be running, okay? So this is just an example one. We're not gonna talk just about nitrogen, right? Phosphorus, potassium, all of them have gone up in price. So this is an example of a field. If we look at the phosphorus levels, one of those fields has a ppm of 39, another one has a phosphorus of 10, right? Those are the kind of things we need to look at of which one of those would I probably target for an application this year. Any opinions in the crowd? If I had to pick the one that's got 39 ppm or the one that's got 10, which would I put some phosphorus on? The 10, right? If we look back at our research, and that's why we're going to compare other universities' research as well, other labs, the data shows that we need to focus on those fields that are going to have the best response, right? We've gotten in the habit of, a lot of us maybe do a build or maintain program. Maybe this is the year we can get by without doing some of that, okay? Just focus on the ones that are most critical, okay? What's going to give us a return on our money? Ooh. Touchy mouse. So on the nitrogen side, the tool that we have we have a lot of confidence in at UNL is our UNL nitrogen calculator, right? So I've got a link at the bottom. This was actually just updated within the last couple of weeks to tell you how things are a little bit out of whack, right? Or when they originally did this calculator the first time, they had a maximum price input into the spreadsheet of $1,200 a ton anhydrous. We're currently at 1,400. I know some people are saying. So, you know, we had to fix the spreadsheet just to make the numbers work. Doesn't change the math behind it, right? You know, there's still an important ratio of how much should we apply to meet the crop need. The other big thing though that this looks at this year is what is that ratio? You know, what are you paying for the fertilizer versus what can you sell that bushel of corn for? So same things that Jessica's saying, it's got that economic component to it. So let me go to the spreadsheet itself and we'll plug in some numbers, okay? So that's always the debate, right? What do you put in here for price? I put in there's a marketing service that has a monthly or a weekly report, right, of what fertilizer prices are. So they had $1,300 or $1,100 a ton for anhydrous this week. Like I say, there's some that are 14 or more. So just throwing in something, you know, and I think that's what we're seeing this fall. We've got some guys that booked early, right? Some maybe booked in at 700 something. Those are the guys that are going to run like crazy, right? Because they've been told by the co-op, if you don't get it on, you may not get that price again, right? So we still want to make sure we're doing the right thing though, right? So I have 604 for 32, 545 for 28%, okay? That's the nice thing with this calculator. If you download this in an Excel spreadsheet, you can plug in whatever numbers work on your operation, okay? We have 3 different options then. So we could do different application methods, right? We could do all fall applied. Anhydrous, you know, we know that's usually our cheapest source. The bad thing with fall applied is we know that it's the farthest ahead of when the nitrogen is actually going to be needed by the crop. So we have the greatest risk for loss, okay? We have to balance, yes, you might be able to get it on cheaper this fall if you already booked it, but we don't want to do something that we're going to lose all that nitrogen out of the soil profile and not grow a crop at the end of the year either, right? So agronomics still are important. We could also do, you know, pre-plant, we could do split applied, you know, look at trying to do things that maybe spread out your application timing. Maybe you have enough locked in that you can put part on at planting time and then hope that we get some later in the season, right? I mean, that's some of balancing our risk, right? So it's just a matter of what you choose for your operation. So I have in here a 200 bushel yield goal. That's probably realistic on a lot of dry land. Irrigated might be higher than that, right? So our UNL yield goal, we always say in there, it's the 5-year average plus 5 to 10%, right? Farmers always want to be optimistic, right? The key is we need to be realistically optimistic, right? You can't say you know, this field always grows 180 bushel corn. I'm going to get 225 this year. There's a possibility of that, but that's a little bit over 10%, right? So be realistic on your yield goals. You know, set those at a realistic level from what your yield shows, okay? The next thing in the calculator, there's just 2 choices. So it's soil texture. So it's either medium fine or sandy. So, you know, around here, we got a lot of silty clay loams, things like that. Any silt loams are going to be medium fine, okay? The next thing in the calculator is our organic matter. So your 0 to 8 inch sample or 0 to 6 or 0 to 10, different labs have different surface levels that they take, right? That's the one that we care about. We just want that surface organic matter, okay? So I've plugged in the 2 different fields that were in that spreadsheet. So one of them, or that Ward lab test before. So one was 3% organic matter, the other was 4.1%. The organic matter credit is a credit for, we're going to break down, we're going to mineralize some of the nitrogen that's present in our soil every year, okay? The microbes, the environment just does that naturally every year. So that's one we would like to take credit for. Hopefully, as we get more organic matter, you get more release, right? With UNL though, we only have data sets that really give us confidence up to 3%. So when we run this calculator, it's not going to give any more credit for the 4.1 than the 3. It caps at 3% organic matter, okay? Next is our effective rooting depth. 48 is as deep as you need to go. The key there, if you do have a sandy soil, sometimes you might have a gravel layer at 24 inches, something that would restrict rooting. So then you need to put that in there because the chances of pulling some of that deeper nitrogen are fairly low. Next is if we took soil samples and ran them for nitrate. So on that test that you have, there's just one sample, right? We just ran a surface sample. Ideally, we would run a deep sample as well. So we would go down to 24, 36 is even better, right? The deeper you go, the better. The other thing with that is think about if you do fall sampling versus spring sampling. If we run a fall sample and we find some nitrate there, are we guaranteed that nitrogen is going to be there when the crop is growing in the summer? Nitrate's leachable, right? So you kind of have to weigh that, if I found a load of nitrogen right at the bottom, 30 inches in the fall, maybe it's worth resampling in the spring this year to make sure that we have that, right before planting time, just kind of a double check, right? So in this case, we just have that 8-inch sample. One of those tests said 7.6 parts per million. The other one said 4.8, okay? That's actually on the two sides of what UNL says. So UNL, if you don't put a test at all on a silty clay loam soil or a medium fine soil, it's gonna throw in a default of 6 parts per million. They think that's kind of the average based on long-term tests, okay? So we have one field that's actually got a little bit more nitrogen than what UNL would on average say. We got one that's a little less, right? That doesn't add up to a lot of pounds. Just know that it's always better if you plug in your own numbers, okay? Next thing is our previous crops. We need to know that for our legume credit, right? Our previous crop. So in this case, we have soybeans. Does anybody in the crowd know what the UNL credit is for soybeans? How many pounds of nitrogen? What'd you say? 15?
Based off your yield.
That's, so we used to, the old school is you always heard like the 1 bushel per pound, right? Or 1 pound per bushel. UNL's anymore is just 45 pounds flat credit. So on a non-sandy soil. Sandy soil would only be 30 pounds. So that crop makes a big difference, okay? Corn on corn takes more nitrogen. The reality of that is there's just more carbon out there, that we have to overcome with nitrogen, basically. The big thing I think this year, the one that we would really want to watch on that previous crop is alfalfa. If you tear out alfalfa and plant corn into that, if it's a good healthy stand that you tear out, we give that a credit of 150 pounds. So you might be able to grow some pretty good corn, fairly cheaply next year, just using that credit off alfalfa, okay? Next is if you have irrigation, so that'd be our next credit. So in this situation, we're doing a dry land example. The key with this is one credit I know people don't like to take. And the debate always there is, how do I know how much water I'm gonna pump, right? So once again, go back to your long-term average. If your long-term average is you pump 5 inches of water, maybe you only take 80% of that. Maybe you only credit 4, okay? That's better than nothing. I mean, the chances of us not irrigating at all are fairly slim, right? We're gonna irrigate some, typically most years. So if you have any nitrate in that irrigation water, make sure you're taking credit for it as well. Next would be manure. So we would select if we had any manure that we'd applied. It isn't just this year's manure. We go back 3 years worth. So there's a little bit of that residual, organic nitrogen. Make sure you're taking credit for that if you had a manure history in the last 2 or 3 years. That little bit's going to help us out this year, right? Then we select our nitrogen program. So in this one, we're going to do a split application. We could switch one to a fall, whatever you want to pick, right? You can run different scenarios. And then the big one, like Jessica said, was what is that expected corn value, okay? So me, personally, the little bit we farm, I always tell people do the opposite of whatever I do for marketing, it seems like. I mean, that's the usual, right?
Before you sell,
Yes. Whenever I sell, wait till a couple days after, it'll probably be going up, okay? So, so the key is you don't want to lock in all that input without selling something. So, I mean, that's kind of the key here, right? So take a guess of what you think you can get, but be realistic, right? The other one then would be any nitrogen applied since harvest. So a lot of times we don't think about that little bit of nitrogen that's in, 1152O. Even if that's only 10 pounds this year, throw it in there, take credit for that, right? When it's $1 a pound, that adds up to something, okay? Then the calculator does its magic, okay? So our crop requirement that it would actually need to grow would be the 275, and then it takes off all the credits. Now, our calculator starts with your yield goal times 1.2 plus 35 pounds. It looks like a big number to start with, right? The reality is the calculator only works if we look at the entire thing. You got to include the credits, you got to include everything in there to get to that final end rate, right? It's kind of hard to pull one thing out of there and just look at that one credit by itself. So we start at 275 bushels. We then take off 84 pounds for our 3% organic matter. We get 30 pounds out of what's in the soil, and then 45 pounds since the previous crop was soybeans. Gets us down to a recommended N rate of 116 pounds. Remember, 200 bushel yield goal. Is anybody scared already? Does that seem low? Little, right? It's starting to be a little worried, right? The thing then that this does is then it looks at that price per pound of nitrogen compared to the price of a bushel of corn, okay? So then it starts making an adjustment based on that price. The reason we do that is that, remember your nitrogen application curve, right? The first pound you put on, you get a lot of yield response. The last pound you put on is usually pretty low, right? It's starting to tail off. So when nitrogen is expensive and corn isn't worth much, we back off. If corn's worth more, we can go higher on that curve, right? So that relationship is important. So if I'm running fall anhydrous at $1,100 a ton, the corn price to nitrogen ratio is 7.5. So it actually increases a little bit. One is that with fall application, we know it's inefficient, so we actually recommend a 5% higher rate than you would need if you did it in the spring, okay? On the other hand, if I change that to a pre-plant application, you'll notice the price of nitrogen went up to 74 pounds. Now it backed the rate down to 108. So what if we go up here and we put in a price of, I've heard of, $6.75, which would be that $1.05 a pound. But change this. Backed it off quite a bit there, didn't it? Now it backed it down to 84 pounds of nitrogen. So take this, play with it, see what you think you're comfortable with, right? The key is know what would actually be economic this year, right? Pouring it to the coals probably isn't the best plan in a year like this. If you can even get the product, that's the big thing, right? So any questions? Okay.
Well, now you got me nervous at 84 pounds trying to raise 200.
It seems
Seems like you're giving up a lot of potential there just to save $5 an acre.
that's, yeah, I mean, I get that. That's where we always need to look at though. We got to look at the max economic yield, right? Not the max yield. That's, play around with it, see what you're comfortable with, right? Some of us are not going to be comfortable going this low, even if the numbers say maybe that's the right thing to do. But there's that uncertainty of what is actually going to happen in the spring, right? With prices both ways. So that's where I kind of like the philosophy of put on a base rate now, if you're running in the fall, and then maybe we can see how we can adjust during the summer, right? Also gives value to, instead of going all pre-plant, if we can plan on a side dress or switching up our timing, it allows us to adjust during the season, right? If prices suddenly correct, we could put on a little bit more during the in season if we have the capability. So. Okay. The next one then will be phosphorus. So phosphorus, the UNL recommendations on phosphorus. Yeah, yeah.
If you have, if you're putting on 200 pounds of nitrogen, that's what I call it. If you split that, how much can you drop that down?
So the question was if we're running a split application, how much can we lower our rate? So in the calculator itself, it's going to lower by 5%. So it would back off by 5% on that rate. You, depending on when that timing is, you know, and that's what the calculator uses, that might be a little conservative, right? You know, depending on if, I would go even higher maybe if you're doing something like fertigation where you can spoon feed it, you know, maybe then you get by with even less, right? So it's kind of the, how much are you splitting it and how are you putting it on? So I think there, you know, this might be another a year where there's value in doing some tissue sampling and seeing how you're doing. And if you can get in there late, put some extra on, or, you know, time it out a little bit more that way too. So then we'll switch to phosphorus. So phosphorus, this calculator is included in your packet. There's a link to download it. It's another Excel spreadsheet. The key with phosphorus, you got to know what test you're running, okay? Some labs are going to run a Bray, some are going to run a Malik, some run a Malik 2, some run a Malik 3, or there's the Olson, okay? So this spreadsheet, you select which one you're running. You put in your parts per million from that test. Then it asks you some questions, right? So what was last year's crop? So, you know, if we're going from soybeans that we harvested this fall to corn next summer, select that. The next one then you see is how often do you apply phosphorus? So a show of hands in here. Who puts it on every year, both corn and soybeans? Who puts it on just for corn year and puts on enough for the soybeans next year, right? That's what most of us do. The challenge in a year like this is, do you want to do that when you know that fertilizer's high, right? Maybe we go with a lower rate just to meet the corn needs this year. And then we figure out the fall of 2022, what we need to do for the bean year, right? I know that's more application cost, that's more time, but make those decisions. You know, it's not just a single year, it's multi-year on some of these things we're making decisions on. Then you can put in previous yields. So let me go to that calculator. So once again, I'm going to pull from the one test, the soil test those in the crowd had. So one of those fields was 37, right? 37 parts per million. And that was a Malik 3 test. So you'll notice what it says is a Malik 3 of 37 gives us a Bray equivalent of 31.45. Malik and Bray are close, but they're not 100%. So it is important when you're looking at some of these numbers to make sure you get that correction in there. So then we go down. Just going to use a field that I know. We had soybeans this fall. We took off, they were 60 bushels. So we have the previous year, you know, we have crop removal included this as well, okay? So the phosphorus recommendations from UNL, they basically look at two different scenarios and they say use the higher rate of one of those scenarios. So one is what the crop removal was at certain parts per million soil phosphorus. The other is just where you at on a response curve, basically, okay? So in this case, 60 bushel soybeans, 37 parts per million. You'll notice it says we don't need any phosphorus, okay? That's the recommendation UNL would say in this situation. We have a high enough soil phosphorus level, we just don't see the chances of a good economic return of making that phosphorus application. Chances are we could run for a couple years, right? Lower that value over time. Once we get back down to a critical level, then we apply again, get back, right? This is maybe the year that you think about not doing a maintenance program on some of these fields, okay?
Well, your 37 there is what in our handouts is reading 5. So that's, okay. I was looking at the 5 parts per million, you put 37.
So there should be one field that's got 37 parts per million phosphorus, right? it always prints off really small, right? It's actually 39, I guess I'm wrong even. So yeah, so phosphorus, that first field is 39 parts per million. The lowest one would be 10. Right? So let's change this to 10 and see what it does. So for 10 parts per million, that field, now you'll see it switches to 53 pounds of phosphorus for just corn next year. If we would go that we're going to go with an every other year, it basically doubles it, right? So now it's factoring in some phosphorus for the bean year in 2023. With this, this morning was visiting with a colleague, and we thought the calculator was broke for a while, but then we figured out what our problem was. So remember how I said it either goes off crop removal or based off what the soil test is. So if we go in here and we go down to 5 parts per million or 6, it changes, right? Once we get up to 10, if I have 10 parts per million versus 15, doesn't change as much. Actually, let me go to 14. So let me go to every year. So every year, 10 versus 15, the rate doesn't change because all it's looking at there is what the soybean crop removed. So it's kind of used to be just one thing was the kind of the rate. Now you have to look at, the calculator does that comparison of different things, okay? So once again, another tool you can download, you can plug your own numbers in and see what it looks like. Okay, so the next thing then, there's a couple pages of these kind of charts. So Nathan Mueller put these together, the educator down in Saline, Jefferson and Gage. So this is where we can compare what UNL says versus K-State versus Iowa State, South Dakota, or Ward Labs, okay? Just picked one of the labs to use. So it's not an endorsement, just had to pick one, right? So what you can see here, what does anybody take as a moral of the story of that chart? If you had to put on phosphorus, what field did you put it on? The ones that are very low, right? Everybody is in agreement there, right? So Iowa State, doesn't matter if it's Iowa State, UNL, whatever, the highest rates are at the lowest testing fields. There's not a lot of difference there between states, right? Now, the one thing I want to point out there, look at the sampling depth. UNL's recommendations are based off of an 8-inch sample. All the other labs are based off a 6-inch sample. What do you think happens to soil phosphorus when we take an 8-inch versus a 6-inch? Where's most of the phosphorus in our soil? It's going to be at the top, right? So when we take an 8-inch sample at UNL, we actually dilute, we get 2 more inches of stuff that's lower in phosphorus than the top, right? So our UNL recommendations, you know, if we say a 10 parts per million for an 8-inch, that might be more like an 8 for a 6-inch, right? You know, we've kind of lowered, we've changed those numbers. So in reality, our numbers are fairly similar on phosphorus across the universities. So everybody, you know, it gets up into those high levels. That's when we start to wonder, right? You know, K-State, high level of 15 to 20 says put a little bit on. Ward Labs as well. Iowa, UNL, South Dakota don't. So the chances of response in those get fairly slim. So it's just a matter of gambling a little bit, right? Whether you think you're going to get a response or not. So that one's for corn. If we switch to soybeans, Soybeans, fairly similar again. You know, there's a little bit of difference there, right? You know, UNL's at 65, K-State's 75, Iowa State's 80, South Dakota 63, 61. Fairly similar though, right? You know, once again in the ballpark. So value again with this, find your fields that are your lowest testing, prioritize those for applications. That's where you want to spend your money this year, right? For sure. We would say that's where you want to spend your money most years, but it's doubly important in a year like this. Okay. Okay. I've included in the packet, there's an, these previous charts were for corn after soybeans. One thing they also recently changed, our soils group, phosphorus recommendations for corn change if you're corn soybean or if you're corn continuous corn. Continuous corn needs, the research they did showed that it needed more phosphorus. So you're going to have a higher application on corn fields than you do on corn on soybean. So there's an article in there that Nathan wrote that kind of talks through that, the reasoning behind it. I've also got a spreadsheet. Now let me go to the actual spreadsheet. So this was from the study that they did that made them change their rates. So over the life of the study, 6 years, they had 3 different sites. So it was corn on corn. All of the sites that they started with when they first started the study had 10 parts per million phosphorus or less. So they were low testing fields already, okay? So they had plots where they applied no phosphorus the life of the study. That gave us a yield of 154. They then used the UNL the recommendation based on parts per million, what would be, they would apply. So that got an average yield of 163 bushels with 41 pounds of phosphorus applied every year, basically, the average. Another program, right, is just to replace what we took off, right? So we're going to go with the crop removal rates. So they did a crop removal rate, resulted in a yield of 169. Average application was 43 pounds over the life of the study. We then had the maintenance programs. I'm going to get it 25 parts per million. I'm going to keep it there no matter what, right? Or I'm going to build my soil to 35 and keep it there at that point. Now, remember, we're starting with less than 10. So you got to pour some phosphorus to it to get it up to 35, right? So the average there was 101 pounds, 59 pounds to get it to 25. If we look at the profit using some current pricing, so $850 a ton for MAP, Nathan was a little more optimistic at 521. If we go to the 507, we're using everything here. If we compare the UNL recommendation to applying no phosphorus in this situation, we gain $11 by using UNL's recommendation. If we switch to the replacement crop removal rate, we gain $40. So that's why they changed their recommendation on corn. They actually say to go to a removal based on what the crop removed. Corn on soybean, they didn't see that relationship. Just on the corn that we saw that, okay? Building up to 35 parts per million, we're actually losing money because we're spending that much money on phosphorus to build it up to that point, okay? So. Next one then would be potassium. Most of Nebraska is lucky, right? We have high subsoil potassium. However, we're starting to see some fields pop up that do have lower and lower potassium values. Remember, higher yields, we're pulling more off with our crops, right? So crop removal is going up for sure, especially with some of the yields you're hearing this summer, right? This fall, there's some pretty good yields out there. So recommendations again are fairly similar across universities. As far as rates. So this is just a resource you can kind of utilize, right? You can say, I only trust this university or this university. You can kind of pick and choose, right? We're free. You can use whatever you want in this situation. So just kind of give you a resource of all the different ones that are out there. Soybeans. This one does have a little bit of difference. So if you look at UNL's recommendation on soybeans, at the very low, we would be running 60 pounds of K2O. Look at Iowa State's rate. They're double us, right? So they're at 120. So we're definitely the lowest of all of them in this one, right? So this is always something we maybe as a university need to look at and say, okay, is it time to revisit some of these things, make sure our research is up to date, see what's going on, right? So the other one that Nathan included was just zinc. So that's another one. You can compare different rates. So once again, just a resource for you. Of any nutrient, whether it's, you know, some of the micros or whatever, if you know that that is your limiting yield factor, you got to spend the money on it, right? So just focus on ones that you know are more likely to return money to you. Most universities don't have a recommendation on zinc for soybeans, so that's one that we still need to look at some work on. And then the other thing I included for everyone was just some neb guides. Somehow this one got messed up, it looks like. So there's the nutrient management suggestions for corn in there, so that's something you can read through. So that covers all of our recommendations for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all the micros as well, okay? So any questions?
You didn't say nothing for sulfur.
Sulfur is,
But now I'm hearing you're put sulfur.
so sulfur is one that their UNL's recommendations are different than other states. If you look at Iowa State would be basically recommending on dry land 15 pounds per acre, regardless of soil test. With sulfur is one that sulfur is leachable, it's movable in the soil. So soil test values and yield response have not been really well correlated. So it's kind of hard to look at your soil test and say this sulfur is going to respond or not. Sulfur is one that I personally think we need to do some research on at UNL again, because currently our recommendations would say you would only apply on sandy soils, low organic matter fields. However, I've got some ground not too far from here that's got 4% organic matter that I did see sulfur deficiency on. So that's one we need to look at. I would not skimp on sulfur. I know of some co-ops that they won't sell nitrogen without sulfur anymore. That's just what we're seeing. So the last thing I want to mention would be lime. Lime is the one fertilizer that really hasn't changed much in price, other than trucking, right? Trucking's going up. If you run a soil test and you find a field that's got low pH, spend your money on lime before anything else, right? Lime is going to be your best. Fix that soil pH, get it back to what it needs to be. I know the big challenge we have with that is rented ground, right? Who pays for lime on rented ground? It should be the tenant, right? But we know that doesn't always happen. If you as the farmer have to pay for it, I think the one thing we have to try to negotiate there is let's figure out something that gives me money back if you kick me off in 2 years or 3 years, right? You got to prorate that somehow that you're going to get 5 to 7 years out of that lime application of value. So how do we make that pay for everyone? Okay. But too often I see fields that have way, pH is way out of whack. You got a 4.9 or something, and they're spending money on phosphorus and everything else, right? At those low pHs, everything's tied up. It isn't available. So you're wasting money in those situations, right? So, and with us seeing higher and higher yields, as we put on more nitrogen and we put on more sulfur, both of those lower our pH faster. So we are going to see more lime application needed to counteract some of the, applications we're doing. So. Okay, any questions?
Is that page in our handout?
Lime should be, it should be the very end. Should be the last neb guide in there. So kind of the critical levels for lime. The big thing there is it depends on what your crop is. Crop rotation, excuse me. So typically if you're growing corn on corn, 5.5 would be our kind of target. If you're above that, if you're at 5.8 on corn, there's really no sense in probably making an application. If you're corn on soybean, the critical level is 5.8. If you throw wheat or alfalfa in there, now we go up to like 6.5, 6.2. Alfalfa for sure responds to soil pH, right? So that's one of those long-term things we need to think about. If you're going to alfalfa next year, try to get lime on the year before if possible to raise your pH ahead of time. So that's kind of the challenge, right? In a year like this, when things are out of whack, do you gamble on just making corrections this year, or do you still stick with your long-term plan? So. Any questions?
How familiar are you with the ProCal 40
So ProCal 40, a little bit.
versus Lime? I've heard it's more responsive or more available.
So
I've used some.
yeah, so Pel Lime basically kind of a product almost, or
Well, ProCal comes out of ethanol plants, if I'm not mistaken. And it's not a pellet.
okay.
Anybody else know?
Trying to think.
It's more of
I don't think it comes out of ethanol.
a. I thought it was. Comes out of where?
I'd have to do some checking on that one. I think because ProCal is a gypsum product, right? Is that one?
That's from a classes, the corn plasticization process.
Yeah.
The guys up by, just north of here, whatever. They have a big plant out there. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Outside products, it's their shipped in. They
Yeah.
have to barge it up the.
Oh, they get it, oh, I thought it was coming out of there. Yeah, that's the guy that I'm talking about. I thought it was from plasticization, byproduct.
Typically, every study I've seen, ag lime is your best. If you need to change pH, ag lime is your best bet. Pel lime is expensive compared to ag lime in relative terms, but we use it a lot of times on some fields, especially if it's not owned ground. Gypsum will not change pH. I mean, it's got the calcium, it's got other things it'll help with, but if you.
Gypsum they try to lower the pH, if you're too acidic,
Yeah,
or too alkaline.
yeah. So,
Need more study on it.
yep. Yeah, let's visit afterwards. We'll figure out. Okay. Believe Glennis is next, right? So. I'm going to turn it over to Glennis now for those online.
Well, thank you for all of your good information. Ryan has put together a website with all of the handout materials and some of the calculators and so on. So those of you that are online, you should have received a link to that, and we're adding to it. And then the recording will be added as well. So even though those of you that are in person in attendance here, we'll make sure we have your email though. Okay. So if we have your email, we can send you that link afterwards. All right. So let's see. This is Jessica's. All right. I got to figure out where mine is. It went away. It must not be. Okay. Let's see. I think I stuck it on the desktop, so it should be right here. And then also, I'll get to the budget calculator here in a minute. Okay, is that showing up all right? Okay, very good. Okay, so the last part of this is really sort of to wrap sort of things together a bit and kind of look at a whole farm budget situation type deal. And so I'm Glennis McClure, and I have statewide responsibilities in working on crop and livestock budgets and also the custom rates report. This year is the time where we're going to be doing that survey. So if you do any custom rates and we haven't got your email or your address, let me know. Let me know what that is, and we'll send you that survey, because the more we have participating in that survey, the better off we are. The more information, the better, okay? Because that is a really widely used publication and extension, and that's, you know, kind of my responsibility. And so we'd love to hear from you on that. But really, I do tell people, I get phone calls all the time from, oh, what should I be charging? What should this be for custom, or what should I be paying for custom rates? And I always say for folks that are doing the work, that you really need to know your costs. So again, I'm one of those economists, I'm one of those sort of numbers people, and it's okay to look at that market rate study on one hand, but on the other hand, you really need to know your costs. And that really falls in line with what we're talking about today. I really appreciate that Jessica said, hey, I'm going to be in Eastern Nebraska. You know, this is a hot topic. And so I'm really glad that we're together with our crop folks to sort of tackle this issue. And I appreciate, you know, what you put together, information you put together, Jessica, and of course, all our crops folks for that. So you'll probably hear some of these things continuing. And I also think it's important then, as you look at sort of individually, you got to think about, again, what your costs are, and bottom line, what can you do with those costs and make some decisions. You know, you can also look at all the recommendations and really what works good for your farm with all of the nutrients and so on. We had one person yesterday say, well, yeah, I usually put on 200 pounds because that's what the neighbors do. All right. But I really appreciate the information that you guys have shared on really sort of getting down to sort of the nitty gritty of that. And so what I'm going to talk about today too is sort of that overall, what does it look like in your overall picture for that crop budgets that you're putting together? Oh, and I must say today is 11/11. So thank you to the veterans that we have in the audience, both here in person and online. So just one of those special days, but we're working. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, so I'm just going to go through for a little bit with you what we have developed as far as something new and different with our crop budgets for the university. How many of you are familiar with the crop budgets that we've posted for years and years online at UNL? Okay. There's a few that are shaking their heads and they've used those. How many of you, and even online, it'd be nice if you put it in the chat if you've used those a lot. How many of you have used the program in Excel, the Excel version, or you've looked at, let's say, so we usually post them as Excel or as PDFs, and the Excel versions, excuse me, were made so that you could go in and make some changes, all right? So we're developing a new ag budget calculator to make it even easier for folks that maybe not are, you know, are really Excel gurus. And I hear people too say, what happens if I use Google Docs? Because there's those spreadsheets in Google Docs. Well, we didn't have that formatted as such. So now we've got an online budget calculator where you can actually get down to entering your own equipment, your own costs, again, entering some of your inputs and so on, as we've talked about today, into the budget calculator. So I'm just going to flip through. Knowing your cost of production. I think first and foremost, and actually part of our point of all this here too is that, you know, yes, the costs are high, inputs are higher now, but also you've got some opportunity on the marketing side, hopefully. Okay, so if you really know what your costs are, how can you relate that back and make some marketing decisions with a little bit more confidence? That's what we're really trying to do. If I know that, well, we'll look at some figures here and then we'll talk about that a little bit more, how that might work. And of course, looking at various enterprises, and year after year, if you see certain things that aren't as profitable, why do you continue to do it? All right, so your enterprise budgets, if you really get down to the nitty gritty on those, you might be able to tell you something. Why am I doing this alfalfa when it's not, you know, paying me back, or maybe it is, right? Okay, and the costs that go into it and so on. And then, you know, taking a look at what your production practices are and maybe doing some benchmarking, looking at what other folks and some of the information is, and how is what you're doing compares to what others are doing, all right? So we have, and I'm working on the 2022 budgets as we speak. It's been a really very, very busy couple of weeks. I don't do those alone. Bob Klein, actually out of North Platte, who is a crop specialist and has been involved with this for a long, long time. He and some other of our crop specialists get together and say, here's kind of what our recommendations are. And we've got about 25 of those 84 crop budgets are corn alone. We've got dry land and irrigated. So I'm back and forth almost daily right now with Bob trying to get some of those done. All right. And I do want to say this year it's going to be pretty important for us to say that the prices that we've put in, he did some research and talked to some folks, and I did as well. Those are October 2021 prices. And then we've kind of seen, you see some of those upticks, all right? So that there again, you can't just look at somebody's budget online and say, oh yeah, this is it. This has got all the information I need. No, you really need to go in and make some changes. Even like Aaron, I've shared with some of the crop folks, some of these budgets for different areas. And Aaron said, oh, this one's pretty good. A lot of the cropping practices are right on target, but the yield goal really isn't fit this area. And if the yield goal gets changed, then you really need to change that fertilizer. So even just within the university, we can make some changes. And I should say here too, that if any of you are really interested in learning more about that and really would like to play a part in helping us with sort of area by area budgets, I would hope to have Aaron or Melissa or Luan, anybody that has, if you have, a good handful of crop producers and they want to sit down with us and say, this is what the typical, or this is what a representative budget is for this area, we would love to do that. So I think on the university side, we've got sort of these broad scope budgets, and we'd like to sort of narrow them down a little bit so it can be more useful to you and others in your area. So kind of keep that in mind if you have an interest in working with us. I hope that they're all in agreement. I'd love to, and again, well, with the Ag Budget Calculator, a new online program, and I was just thinking, Aaron, with all of your tools that you have, all your resources, I guess our ideal world, right, would be if we could all integrate all of those things online. So someone could come in, first go and do all of their fertilizer recommendations as you talked about, and then just kind of zip it over into our Ag Budget Calculator. That's down the road a few years, but definitely worthy of something we should talk about. All right. So if you are familiar with our crop budgets, as we have had them, this shows, you can't really see it with some of the Zoom information up there, but the top section over here on the right is the field operations. So we took sort of the same premise of what we've done with our budgets to date, and they go back many, many years, where we say, okay, what do you do to grow this crop? What are your operations? And so those get entered into the program. And then alongside those, if I'm doing a burn down herbicide, what are those herbicides that go into that? So in this case, the burn downs, I think in this case, we've got like glyphosate, 2,4-D, and an additive that goes in. So there's 3 products or materials that relate to that. And we've kind of kept with that same premise as we've tried to build our Ag Budget Calculator. And then of course, down at the bottom are some of the overhead costs and additional things that you need to think about. So our Ag Budget Calculator program, and you have in your packet one sheet that sort of describes this a little bit, but one of the key things here is, as I've already sort of alluded to, is that we want you to be able to customize those budgets. All right, not just look at what somebody else put together, right? Again, you're gonna look at that this year and say, man, fertilizer doesn't cost that. It's more than that now, right? Okay, or that recommendation isn't what we just figured out. It might say 150 pounds of N, and you only need 125, okay? So it's what we're trying to get at is that you can customize your enterprise budgets. We always look at a cash and an economic budget report. Cash showing your cash expenses, and the economic side of it being all of your total expenses, cash and economic, meaning that we've included depreciation costs and also opportunity costs. So if I wasn't investing in growing this crop, or I wasn't investing my money into my equipment, what could I be getting elsewhere on that money? What would be my return on investment? And also depreciation. So again, as an economist, you'd really need to, in the long run, cover your economic costs. In the short run, you might be okay to get by with just covering cash costs. So when we run up against years like we might be projecting, where cash costs are probably maybe going to be a little bit higher, you're okay for a year or two. But over the long run, you got to look at your cost situation and cover your economics. And we'll look at some examples. And actually, I do have some examples in the packet of some reports I ran on a couple budgets here in this area. The other thing that we're adding into our new budget calculator is a revenue section. We have not up to date had included revenue, and also a risk section. I'll show you what that does so that you can kind of relate back to what, you know, how you're doing and how you really, and again, if we're looking at higher costs, it's even more important, right, to sort of do some risk management. And what would it mean if in this next year, we really had some poor crop yields? Okay, you've put all this expense into your crop, and you know we had some really poor yields come about. Are you protected on that risk side? Are you covered with insurance or whatever to do that? So we've added a section into our budget program to talk about that. And then of course we have our direct expenses for enterprises, our crop expenses, but we also have to take into consideration those overhead costs. How do we, if I'm a crop farmer and I still need to pay for that pickup, I need to still pay for that accountant, that tax preparer, whatever, utilities, those kinds of things. Are we making sure that we're covering all costs? And so there's a way to reconcile expenses and include overhead into our program. And then we're working on a whole farm component, and it's very close to being done. Whereas if I have all of my crop enterprises or all my livestock, everything included, I can put that together and take a look at what's the whole farm situation. And then from that, even we're developing a cash flow, to Jessica's point, how important that is. And it'll be really nice to say, if I'm paying for all these expenses and I'm doing this over these several months through the year, what is that month by month cash flow going to be sort of developed right from your budgeting program? And then we'll be working on the livestock part of it. All right. So this is a free program. It's agbudget.unl.edu, and that should be, well, actually on the bottom of this sheet, we have cap.unl.edu, which is our Center for Ag Profitability, CAP, all right, and then a /ABC. So when you go to that page, you'll see a lot of overview information about the ABC program that I'm talking about here, Ag Budget Calculator, in other words, known as ABC. And so you can go in there and you'll find the link, all right? And also I've got a note here that I'm not going to be able to cover very much of this in the time that we have. We've kind of sped through things today, but I'm not going to take that much time today to go over it with you. But even starting on Monday, I've got ABC 1.0. So if you'd like to learn more about it and get on Zoom and I can walk through the program with you, I'll do that. I've got a number of training sessions lined up between now and the beginning of February. I've got ABC 1.0, ABC 2.0 programs where we'll get into that whole farm component. And then also I've just got some Zoom sessions lined up for Q&A. So if people are using it and they're running into some problems, we'd love to know about it, because again, the program's in development. It's working great now. We'll be putting all of our 2022 budgets in there. We've already got 2021 budgets in. We'll have some help sessions for you online, and I would, so don't be afraid of it at all. Again, it's a free program. So you can go in, basically you have to create an ABC account. When you go to agbudget.unl.edu, it'll ask you to create an account, and all you need to do is enter your email and then create a password. And that then is your account. You can go in and mess with budgets. You can download the university budgets. You can do all sorts of things, and it's just yours and yours alone. We are not going to be utilizing your information. We can't. The university, we have no way of saying, oh yeah, your budget was right on target, we're going to use it, right? No, we have no way of verifying that it's correct. All right, so these are just really accounts that so you can go in, you can work for a couple hours, come back out, go back in every week and work on it here now for a while. Even during the year, I had a question yesterday. What happens once I get through the year and I have my actuals? I've budgeted, I've projected, what do? Well, yeah, you could go in throughout periodically and say, well, yeah, diesel prices change, fertilizer prices have changed. What's your average cost? You can make those changes. I suggested to this guy yesterday that we have a copy feature. So if I have my dryland corn budgets, I could go ahead and copy that budget and then go in and put in my actuals. So I could have here's my budgeted and here's my actuals in doing that. So anyway, there's some duplication features. We're trying to make it so that it's really working nicely for everybody. And again, we're very interested in the feedback that you provide. I'm going to show you now a little, just that program and a few things about it. All right, if I can get to where I need to be. All right, here we are. So I've got multiple accounts, okay? I have test accounts. This happens to be the account that I'm working on, the 2022 budgets. They aren't completely up to date. There's quite a few, 84 of them, takes a lot of time. I do have a student helper with me on that, but Erin suggested, I asked actually for a couple of corn budgets for your area, and I want to show you kind of how that works. Let's see, Erin, which numbers do we have? Okay, the dryland number 24 budget, he thought was a good one, and it's a no-till after soybeans. It should say Eastern Nebraska there. I'm going to show you sort of the features. Again, this is a list of like basically 83, 84 budgets. We added a new one for this year, but here we are, and this is just so this looks familiar, or this will be familiar to you as you get into it. As most programs are, there's tabs across the top. And if I hover over those points, there's some drop downs. I could go in and create a new enterprise. I can start from scratch. I can just go ahead and start with one of my enterprises and say, okay, here's how I grow my corn. Here's how I do this, and go ahead and start with that. I can duplicate one that I already have. So once you spend time putting information in for one enterprise, you can actually go ahead and duplicate it and then go and make changes as needed for another one. Also, I'm going to flip over here, university budget. So as I mentioned, we have our 2021 budgets in already that you can access. We're just making updates on prices. Some of the application rates are getting changed, but there's not a huge amount of changes from 2021 to 2022, other than prices and a few things. So you could actually you could find some of these budgets and download those, and then just go in and change the name, change it to your own, go ahead and enter your own information, okay? So the tabs across the top, manage inputs. You'll spend a lot of time here. We have annual rates, like what is the diesel? What's your average diesel projected price for this next year? What is your operating interest cost? Some of those things are in there. Power units, okay, so there's a list of power units. I'll click on that. And you'll see, whenever you're looking at the university budgets, hopefully you see that we have UNL combine, UNL tractor, whatever. So we've got some of those in the background, and you could use those if you want, or you could go ahead here and add a new power unit. So you go in and say, oh, the old red tractor, I've had it for 10 years. This is what it cost me. This is what a comparable tractor would be as a list price. That's the kind of information that goes in to it. So it's nice to have sort of your depreciation schedule handy. So you have all of your machinery, and like when you bought it, how old it is. You can put some of that information in. And this thing is in the background when we're talking about machinery and equipment. We have engineering formulas working to provide us with depreciation, salvage value, fuel efficiency, some of those kinds of things are figured through the program already with some of the equations that we have in the background. So that's how that looks. Same way with implements, all the different implements. I've got university marked on these. Again, we have to plug something in so we can get some figures back. Just keeping going here with the drop down. There's a lot of stuff in there. Materials and inputs. So here's where you would put in your fertilizer costs. Some of these are still probably showing the 2021 prices. Well, actually, I probably should have, most of those have been updated already, at least as of October of 2021. All right. I did look back. It was interesting. You can go back. Let me show you here. University budgets. And then there's this crop watch page. You're probably familiar with crop watch. All right. All of our budgets, I think it goes back to about 09, maybe 08. I just looked today to see, there's information on there. So if you want to go back and look and see what prices we had for inputs back when, you sure can. I looked at 2013, because we were coming off of a drought year and things were kind of wonky back then too. And we see that, I saw that I had anhydrous at 56 cents a pound. I had 2800 at 215 per gallon, and now we're looking at a 225 per gallon rate for 2022. So interesting that really those prices aren't that much different. Again, if we're looking at our October 2021 prices. So you can go back and look at some history there too with some of, but there's a link right here to that budget information. All right, and then labor, you can enter in your labor, so you could actually value your time as the operator or owner, you know, and that would calculate into your budgets. Or let's say you're paying a hired person. Of course, you want to make sure you've got that right in there, the benefits that you provide and so on. And we, with our budgets, we figure about $25 an hour are coming off. And whenever you see labor costs in our budgets, that's what we have. And then you would also enter your irrigation systems, because again, we need to know, you know, with the depreciation, you'll want to know that those costs, the fuel, that kind of thing that gets used with those irrigation systems. So that's the manage input tabs. Whole farm, again, that's our 2.0, where we'll be kind of pulling our enterprises together and so on. So here we are. And then over on the right side, so we got the tabs across the top, but you don't always have to go clear to the top for things. We got these action items here on the right. All right. And so I'm going to go ahead and click Manage Enterprises again. I do this. This is where then I have to go back down and find that number 24 budget. So I'll show you here. The tractor is all the field operations. So field operations, you'll be using this a lot as you build your budgets, because here's where then you put in what you do. So in March we do, and you know, you can vary the time, of course. But we do that burn down, and actually that could be in reverse. We could do the burn down and then put some fertilizer on. And then we go in and plant and put some more herbicides in and so on. Okay. So if I wanted to switch, let's look here. This is a dry land. So if I wanted to, I'll show you how this looks. I could copy that. So if I have multiple operations that are really similar, I could just copy it. So if I've got stuff in there and then make some changes, but I'm going to edit. The little pencil is always the edit or making changes. And this is a spraying fertilizer. And I have the 3200, and I think I've changed it to $1 right there. Okay. So again, I could change the rate. So if let's say I only need 100 pounds, right? 100 pounds of N. And I'm going to put this on 100% of the fields. Okay. So this really kind of wraps it all together. Here's the labor, 100%. Somebody's got to do the work, right? I'm using a medium tractor. I'm using a sprayer. Again, we sometimes have to pick. It may not be perfect. It may not make sense to you, but you could go in here and say, nah, let's see. I'm going to, well, here's what we have under that sprayer. Purchase price, how old it was, what's the coverage rate, how many acres per hour, what's the comparable list price, and so on. And then it calculates that salvage value and some repair costs. But we have it here where you could change that. We could say, you know, I spend more like, you know, $500 a year with that thing. Okay. So you could make that change, and you could, and actually then you could go in and just say, hey, you know, my sprayer is this. This is what I use when I do this. Or it could be custom. There's a nice feature in here to show custom. So like right here, spray fertilizer. And let's say this, I have this custom done. I could check right here. And then I go in and say, okay, what custom service is that? What price did I pay? And how many, you know, what percentage of the acres were covered, and save that custom job. It's not going to like it now because I'm going to say, oops, I didn't put anything in there. I'm going to cancel that out. Okay. All right. So again, back to the one thing, there's different ways to get to where you're at, but I showed you the operation details there. You can make changes pretty easily to what equipment you're using, the fertilizer prices, the rates, and so on. Oh, I guess one thing I didn't show you here is edit details. I'm going to show you on this. Okay, oh, I'm looking at a Gage County one now because we were in Gage County yesterday. All right, I could go in and say, I can change this name very easily. One thing nice about this program is you can actually go field by field, okay? So this is my dryland corn for 2022 on the north quarter, okay? Or this is on my rented ground. You could actually split those out. So again, if you could say, this is what I'm doing there, this is what I'm paying for cash rent or whatever, you know, really that's going to help you sort of more refine what your own costs are. So very easily, I could just go in here and it's not a big deal here, but I can just say, you know, here we are in Saunders County. Okay, corn number in a, you know, I can describe it. So it's really easy to make that change. And I've got budget years in here with UNL behind it, but you wouldn't have that necessarily in your own. This is a corn, dryland corn, how many acres? What's the yield anticipated in bushels, non-irrigated, its own ground. And here's where you could say, if I own the ground, we're saying, what's the opportunity cost of that own ground? Well, one way to look at opportunity cost is, what could I rent it for? If I wasn't operating, what could I rent it for? So you would put an equivalent cash rent value. This is owned, it's marked owned, okay? Or I could cash lease it and then go ahead and put in that cash rent right there. Okay, so the program's really, we really want to make it pretty user-friendly for everyone. And you noticed on that last screen, we had the opportunity cost, plus we also had real estate taxes. Okay, because if you're owning it, you got to pay those taxes too. All right, so I'm going to save that. All right, so questions about that at this point in time? I'm on this corn number 24, and it's probably not fitting exactly what Aaron told me to show you, but you do have copies in your packet of a couple examples that are marked as such from NRIC. And we looked at corn number 24 and also corn number 32. So we just number all that. That's what that is. We just number them from 1 to 84. Our budgets are numbered. And so, but we had an electric pivot, no-till after soybean, irrigated amount too. I was kind of looking here too. I had $1 in on this dryland budget. I had $1 per pound of in, and we had some 1034.0, some starter in at 375 a gallon. And I was looking at this, 37% of the cash operating costs of this budget, 37% are your fertilizer costs. Okay, 22% in this case was your corn costs. And then you can look at your chemicals. I see that Acuron that we're using here is pretty expensive, and that what that amounts to. So you can sort of break down and see what your costs are per. So now look at this. This is what the reports look like coming off of ABC. All right. So the first page there is what you would see with cash. So somebody tell me, what is the cash cost for this dryland budget per bushel? What do you see? Keep going down, total cash costs, so $2.64, okay? All right, now, I mentioned to you that we can put revenue into the budgets, and I put in 513. I think Aaron was using what, 508 or something like that? Something like that, yeah. I looked the other day and just kind of figured, I think it was 538 on December 22 futures, and I took off a 25-cent basis to get like the 513. So that's included in here. So you can see, just to cover, I'm covering my cash costs pretty well, aren't I? Right? And does this includes your seed, your fertilizer, your pesticides? There's some custom services in there. And you see those little triangles on there, on that? The triangles, you can open those up and it'll show you the detail like it's showing you on the pesticides, what's in there, okay? So I didn't open up all those little boxes, but it's got the fuel, it's got your repairs, anything that you consider cash. And there is a cash overhead charge of $25 per acre on there, okay? So the next page is the economic costs. So we have one page for cash, then we have the economic costs. So do you see what the total economic cost is on that page? 389, or maybe I'm looking at a little different one, but 389, okay? So now, are you still making money We're covering all your costs? If we can sell for $5.13? Yep, it's showing that we have a net of $1.24. Now, I'm not saying that every cost that's yours is in this budget. That's why it's important to really plug in your own numbers. And I hope that you would find this program really very easy and fun to use. And I also want to show you on the next page, field operation costs per acre. So if you really want to know what the nitty gritty is behind that, what's that labor cost on all my different operations? What's my fuel cost, repairs, depreciation, and OPP is opportunity costs of that equipment. You can see that list there. And then the very last page then is your purchase materials and inputs, and everything's broke out. So on the program here, I'll show folks at home here what we're looking at. So here we can toggle back and forth between cash and economic. And again, I know I brought up a little different budget. Let me actually find the right budget here so that we're all looking at the same thing. So the NREC one is the one I wanted. I want to look at that report. All right, and here we are looking at that total economic cost of $3.89, right? So the net is still $1.24 a bushel, or I could go ahead and look at cash and look at that report at $2.64 on cash costs. And then look over here, more reports. Here's that field operation report that I've included in your packet. So just a few clicks and you got this stuff, and here's your materials, okay? So hopefully that's really helpful. You can really see the detail then that you've got in behind in those budgets on what you're using, what your products were. And it's kind of nice. I check back all the time to say, well, do I have all those field operations included? Did I mess up somewhere and something got left off? You know, it's just nice to look at these reports. Same way with my materials and inputs. And then I want to show you, because as I mentioned, there is a page in your packet also called risk analysis. I think this is pretty cool. We had a professor help with this module, and he's really the sort of the crop insurance risk guru. But we've got some analysis here. We've got a sensitivity chart, a break-even chart, but the risk analysis module is right here. So when you're in the reports section, you could pull this up. There's a lot of narrative in here. There's a lot of things in here, in other words, that will help you understand what we're trying to do. Okay, it's really, there's not, I mean, there's a lot, but there's really, it's not really hard to get through. So it's just, again, how to think about rare financially devastating events and why consider the role of risk. Okay, got some information there. We've got the state broke down into crop reporting districts. So we are in Saunders County. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Saunders County here. So I'm in that, so all the information, it's not just county by county though, it's by the crop reporting district. And we had 195 bushel yield in this budget, right? This was a dry line, we had 195 bushels for this area. So that's that expected yield. The NAS average is showing there, so just some information that we have in the background. And then looking at what's the regional low, going back several years. It says in 2012, that dry land, chances are, in this crop reporting districts, you've been looking at about 83 bushel per acre yield. What happened that year? In 2012, it was dry, right? Okay, so we actually said, okay, that was a low year, and here, what happened that year? So you could look here and find some more information on that. Okay, so I've got that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this and move on. And so now I can say determine crop insurance projected revenue. So let's say my APH for this field is 170 bushel. Okay, for 2021, we won't have those 2022 figures until when? End of February. So this is still 2021, $4.58. Our insurance projected revenue per acre projected $778.60. There's a lot of narrative here. We've got a lot of descriptions. I can just close that out, click that little question bar and close that out. My disaster yield. So let's say rather than 83 bushel, I end up with 100, okay? It is a dry year again. My yield is down. Let's say we just leave that 513 in there, okay? Our disaster yields still 100. Let's say though, if it's dry across the area, maybe we're looking at $6 with a negative 0.25 basis or thereabouts, okay? So I got the farm revenue, then I would have 100 bushel at 575 basically to sell for, there's my figure there, okay? And then down here, we click on our coverage level for insurance. So let's say I had a 75% coverage level, and I know those premiums yet have not been updated. They will be higher, probably because of volatility this year. So again, you're looking at the 2021 figure there, but you can see then with that coverage level and with that kind of yield, what you would have for revenue. And then we can look at that same report. Let's look. This is, are we still doing okay? Okay. With that figured in, we're still losing about 30 cents a bushel. Okay, but not bad. What happened if you didn't have that coverage? Okay, to cover all of those costs as we project ahead for 2022. All right, so that module is there. It's built in, so you can go through, do your enterprise budget, see, put all your costs in, and then kind of do some what ifs with your crop insurance or your risk management scenarios. Okay, so what do you think? Is it something that could be useful? Basically, we wanted to show you that, yeah, there's been all this alarm about the input prices being higher. But I guess if you can really be confident and have a pretty good idea of what your costs are, both on a cash basis and an economic basis, broken down by enterprise, hopefully, because you're going to market, you have all these different fields of dryland corn, you're going to market corn, right? Dryland or irrigated, you're going to market it that way. All right. But if you get a pretty good idea of what your average costs are in there, and you can do some things with on the marketing side to still lock in some kind of profit, that's what we're hopeful for. Okay. And also protecting some of your risk as well. Okay. So this has been a fun program to work with. And anything come to mind? Anything we have online? Anybody have any questions for any of us? I'm going to go back. And so I'm now back to where I was with that particular enterprise report and work with that. So I just kind of clicked in to get into that risk module and I went back out of it again. So, all right. Anything? No questions? All right. Awesome. Okay. All right. We'll turn it over to Luan for the last few minutes. And again, any questions that you have, just let us know. We'll be around. And I do want to mention before we are done, in your packets, and for the folks online, we do have an evaluation. So there'll be a link to a form that you can fill out, or a survey that you can fill out on that. But you guys have it in your packets here, and we'd love to have your feedback on the program. Okay. So what do you need here? Do you need?
My question, right?
Just what, okay, I'll just click out of this and just go ahead and,
Thank you.
I think there was in the back there. Yeah, right there.
Ooh, Thank you.
Hold that so it doesn't. Get it flipped around. Okay, it's there. Oh, great. Pops up for you.
So good afternoon. My name is Luan. I'm here for a short talk about uniform versus variable rate fertilizer application. I'm the extension educator at Burt, Thurston, and Dakota counties. So on page 6 of Aaron's file, you have a short table about potassium. It looks like this one here. So here we basically have some potassium fertilizer suggestions from UNL. And we have here, like, if your soil sampling is showing that you have this amount, you have between 41 and 74 ppm of K, you have a low amount of your soil, and you have to apply 80 pounds per acre broadcasting plus 10 pounds per acre in the row. But if you have high, you don't have to apply anything. Why I'm showing this, because if we apply a, let's say, flat rate with 80 pounds plus plus 10 pounds, we're gonna have there more or less 6,640 acres applied. We're talking about the low rate here, okay? And we're gonna have, that one is broadcast, and we're gonna have more or less 830 pounds in the row. But I brought a yield map here. You don't have to do, this is a situation I created. Of course, potassium will not cause that losses on yield, but creating a grid of 2.5 acres and sampling the soil on that 2.5 acres, we can have something like this. So this is showing that low, very low, high, medium amount of potassium. And when we go to the numbers, right here on the low, we're gonna have to apply more or less 2,520. And the low, I can see my low here. So on the medium one, we have to choose between broadcasting or the row. So here in this table, we have the differences. So in the flat rate, I have to apply more or less 3 tons of potassium, okay? Broadcasting. And in a row, I have to apply 0.4. If I do variable rate between these zones here, I'm gonna have only 2.3 tons of potassium broadcasting and 640 in a row. Today, it's 750. Thanks for that, Aaron. It was 500 last week. So today, 750. For this 83 acres area, we're gonna have $2,550 and in the flat rate, and here for the variable rate, 1,950. $600 of difference in these 83 acres. Okay, $600 on 83 acres. But if it's 1,000, it will be 7,200. It was just a short, very short presentation because I didn't have a lot of time. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, I think the thing there is if you haven't grid sampled, maybe it's worth looking at it this fall, right? You know,
Oh yeah,
that would be the,
that would be.
once again, that's a long-term investment though, right? More expensive.
Was asking Aaron about pricing for soil sampling and soil analysis here in Nebraska is very high. So I was counting about like $13, it would be like $400 investment. You have like at the end you have $200 saving. But the trick here is that here in this green area, you're saving inputs, and here in this red area, you have an opportunity to increase your yields. This is not only about potassium. It can be P, N, or diseases, you know, soil, different types of soil. So we're talking about potassium only, but I mean, you can do variable rate seeding, you can do different things here.
Okay. Any questions or comments of whatever from the group?
Yep.
Question for Glennis. You still there?
I
Your budget. Are, well, this is 130 field.
Right.
So in the real world, are we gonna prepare budgets for each field?
No, you don't have to. You could put it in your total, like dryland corn acres.
Well, I would hope.
Yeah, definitely. So just, so when you enter the information, just, yeah, just change those acres, right? Definitely, just change those. And then you would have to figure then your average yield for over all of your acres and that kind of thing. So, and if you're, so I'm just saying that it's built so that if you want to be specific about different fields or, especially like your rented ground versus your own ground or something like that, if it's treated differently, you have that opportunity, but definitely don't have to. Yep, good question.
If we have financial statements from the previous year on things like cost of rent overall or insurance,
Uh-huh,
health insurance, those can all be pulled off and plugged into this as well over the whole.
for sure, yeah.
enterprise.
Yes, yes. And you could consider that an overhead expense. You could, figure it so much per acre for overhead, or you could actually kind of figure that into your labor if you're talking about your own health insurance.
Well,
Kind of like what do you want to cover of your own time and labor in those budgets? It could be like zero. I just want to see what this thing does without any of that in there. Or I could go way on the other side and say, hey, I know this is what I have to draw for family living. So I could put that in as my labor cost. Yeah. Mhm. So really you can make it your own and in however many ways you want. So, but again, I would encourage you that if you're wondering about some of those details, that's where, give me a call, give me an email, or jump on one of our help sessions coming up. Because I do have even just Q&A sessions. I'll be online and I can help answer those questions. And so it's kind of nice if you're sitting at your computer with your budget information in front of you, and I'm sitting at mine, and we can share, we can look and see what the issues are or whatever. So that should be a handy way of learning that new tool. So, okay.
So is this the same tool basically as what we've been doing with Excel?
Yeah. Yeah. We're taking that information and dropping it into the program. Have you guys used the Excel program before then? Okay. Yeah. So you might experiment if you have one already, you might experiment on how do you plug it into this and see how you like it. But I think you're going to be able to do a lot more what ifs and really customize things, because especially with the Excel files, one of the things that is really difficult with that was all that machinery and equipment information, because those, I've noticed all how those equations worked. I mean, it's all linked and it's tough to have, you really want to put in your own equipment, in other words. And this will let you do that, or the ag budget calculator will, yeah. So. Mhm.
I think Chad had a question.
Hi, Jeff, yeah.
So yeah, it seems like this is the year to maybe use livestock manure. Is there a place where you can show the economic impact of that? Either a credit or, are you saving?
Yeah, go ahead. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure how to plug that in in the budget, but I mean, if I'm buying it for so much a ton, I'm gonna put that in as one of my cash costs, of course, right? Or if I'm not buying it, have my own, I could value that as well, so.
So that's where on the inside fits into the calculator easily. So for in this instance, if we're gonna do beef manure, dry feedlot manure. The challenge with manure this year, right, is it's all spoken for basically, right? If you had it lined up before, you could get it, but there's just not an excess out there, right? But
Strong Field Resources is still advertising.
that's
so-
good. Yeah. So let's say, let's say it's 20 tons that we're putting on. The key with manure always is get a test, right? Get the average, the values that they're using. In here, we do have just some average values. If I can get to the right, there it is. Somewhere we should have averages. So we're gonna say 2 and 10, okay. And let's say, you know, it's current year. And then the last thing is application method. So big thing with manure, depending on source, cattle manure doesn't have a lot of ammonium in, right? From feedlots. If you're putting on something like hog manure, it's got a lot of ammonium. Definitely the value of getting it incorporated right away this year, right? Because if we wait, if we immediately incorporate it, we give it 95% credit. If we wait 7 days, it's all gone, right? So try to get that ammonium in the ground if you can. Even on cattle manure that has a low amount, it may actually pay to incorporate this year just to get as much as you can if it fits your system. So that 20 tons of manure would give us 107 pounds of nitrogen, right? So now we're down to an N rate of 7 pounds. That's where I'd probably take my gamble that I'd get enough from something else, right? So yeah, it's definitely something we need to look at this year. It's always said that's the best thing you can apply on your ground is manure if you can get it, right? So
What about poultry manure?
poultry manure still very good source. Yeah,
As far as hogs and cattle.
yeah, poultry manure.
There's
Most
probably
of that's
something like-
organic in, so not as critical to incorporate again, but the last input we haven't talked about is herbicides, right? Specifically glyphosate or glufosinate, right? Those are the two that are crazy right now. So that's another thing you may need to be looking at next year is what's my backup plan if I can't get X herbicide, right? So there's some good resources out there. For instance, Purdue had some good things about if you have a cover crop, what other ways could we terminate it than glyphosate if we had to, right? So that's another thing we need to be thinking of is backup plans on those kind of things. It's kind of sad when I went to Baumgart's and actually bought glyphosate cheaper than you could get it wholesale right now. I cleaned them out of their last 2.5 gallons at $24 a gallon. So it's like they hadn't updated the price.
Other questions? Well, again, we just want to thank you for joining us. If you'll just leave your evaluations on the table, I think the panelists are just going to hang out if you have more questions. And know that our phone numbers are on. We know that it's going to be a year of sitting down, especially a winter of sitting down and making these decisions. So reach out to your local extension service where your taxpayer dollars pay our salaries. So use us. We're a good thing that your tax dollars go towards. So thank you guys for joining us today.
And thank you for everyone online.
Yes.